Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning. So where I'm from, I like to get feedback, so I know everyone is here with me. My name is Babatomiwa Adesida. That's how we pronounce it where I'm from, and I'm happy to be here. I work with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Fund in New York, and I'll give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. But before I go into my presentation, I was supposed to have the director of the fund here deliver a keynote address, but unfortunately, due to several things, she couldn't make it, and so she has a video just to say hello.
Good morning to everyone. I would like just to start really giving thanks to Dr. B.H. Bhatia, the organizer and really the soul of this event, and also to all the organizers of the World CSR Congress. I think that this is a wonderful idea really to promote advocacy among private sector companies, not only to work on philanthropy and on social responsibility initiatives, but also to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies. And this is precisely one of the main things that we are working in the Sustainable Development Goals Fund, where I'm working now. I'm the director of the SDG Fund, and we are trying really to implement the 2030 agenda approved by member states in the General Assembly of the United Nations in September 2015. So according with the new agenda, one of the actors to implement the SDGs are precisely the private sector companies. But we would like really to have the companies not only as donors, but also as an actors, which means to co-design, co-implement and co-follow up all the activities and the programs that we are doing in the field. The idea is not that the private sector will replace the governments or the governments will replace the civil society. The idea is really to try to find the synergies among all the actors in order to really achieve the goal, which is to improve the life of the people and to try really to solve the problems that many people still have today in order to access to the basic things, water, sanitation, food, education, and employment. So I really hope that this event will be really an asset for this process. I wanted also to apologize for not being able to be there. Unfortunately, during these months, we are in a very busy season here in New York, preparing the high-level political forum that will be in June, July, in order to accept all the reports submitted by member states in order to see how member states are implementing the SDGs with all the actors in every country. So that's the reason because we are here very busy during these months, and that's the reason because I'm not able really to join you on this event. But thank you so much again. Congratulations for the initiative, and I hope that you can share with us all the main recommendations that you approve at the end of the event. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So I'm just going to go straight into my presentation. Is it showing? Okay, yeah. And so the title of my presentation is The Role of the Private Sector in Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm Nigerian, so it's only expected I'll use the Nigerian experience because that's what I know. I'll give a brief overview of the Sustainable Development Goals Fund. It's a multi-agency and multi-donor mechanism set up by UNDP to ensure that private sector and the UN and various other non-traditional UN partners can work together. We currently work with 14 UN agencies, and if you know how the UN system works, most time UN agencies work in silos. And what the new UN agenda is all about is to promote partnerships, not just between the UN and the private sector, but also between the various UN agencies. The SDG Fund works currently in 21 countries, in 4 regions of the world, currently implementing a budget of about $63 million. We carry out what we call a joint program approach, and we're currently carrying out 150 joint programs across the world, and I'll explain what that means in a few minutes. We have set up what we also call the Private Sector Advisory Group, which is mainly to coordinate partnerships between the public and the private sector, and essentially to implement the 2030 agenda, which is achieving the SDGs. Snapshot of the SDG Fund. So as I said, we carry out a multidimensional approach, which means we work with each program we carry out in all the countries we operate, we ensure that at least 3 UN agencies are working together, and the project is overseen by the resident coordinator in the country of implementation. For national ownership, for us, we believe that national ownership is extremely important for sustainability, because what has happened in the past is when you go in as a donor and you contribute money over 3 to 5 years, the moment you pull out, that's the end of the project. And so for us, national ownership is key, and so we identify national partners to be able to find matching funds for whatever project we're implementing. We set up a national committee as well to oversee it. And then what's different about this? We're engaging what we call non-traditional UN stakeholders. So the private sector, which is the first time the private sector is having to work with the UN as partners, what we call chairs for SDGs, and that's also including academic institutions, so we can document what we're doing and have it embedded in school curriculums. We also work with interfaith dialogues because we understand that people are so stuck on the faith. And so if you work with faith agencies, then they can help you pass the message across with civil society and creative industries as well. This is just a snapshot of how the governance structure of the SDG fund is. And what is critical here is to show that the private sector has a seat at the table. And so as I said, with our joint program approach, we focus on what we call co-creating, co-implementing, and co-evaluating of programs. In the past, I'm sure you're all aware of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and we know that they didn't really meet the goals. And what had happened was that we realized that the private sector wasn't carried along in implementing the SDGs, in the MDGs at that time. They were just seen as donors. And so in implementing the SDGs, one of the critical things is to ensure that the private sector has a seat at the table, and whatever project is being implemented is designed with the private sector. And so when you design the project, you're able to co-design, co-implement, implement together, and co-evaluate. And also in terms of raising the resources, we implement what we call a matching funds agreement, where the budget is split in half. So the United Nations, through the SDG fund, will put half of the funding for the project, and then the other partners, be it the private sector, national governments, or other stakeholders, bring the other half. That way, everyone has a stake and has an equal say in implementing the project. These are the areas of the world where we have carried out our joint programs, and these are the agencies that we have worked with so far, and then we're still working with more. These are the sources of the matching funds, so the various member states, countries, and organizations where funding has come through and where we're implementing the joint programs. And these are the number of beneficiaries, and I mean direct beneficiaries that the UN, through the SDG fund, has been able to touch. So we know 1 million is not a lot when you look at the population of the world. But if we had various agencies and people contributing their quota, then we believe that we'll be able to touch a lot more people across the world. So what's new about the SDG fund on the SDG agenda in itself? It's the role of the private sector. And this is something that is extremely critical when you're talking about trying to achieve the SDGs. It's all about the private sector. And how can you effectively engage the private sector to ensure that you achieve what you set out to achieve? So through the SDG fund, we decided to set up what we have called the Private Sector Advisory Group, which I'll talk about in a few more slides. The chair for SDGs, as I said, including talking to different universities to carry out research, training, and whatnot. And then also including different kind of industries, creative industries, because we find out that people are highly skilled in things such as gastronomy, architecture, arts, and whatnot. We want people to be able to use their core competencies to achieve the SDGs. And so why do we want to engage the private sector? What's so important about the private sector? We had done some research, and we can categorically say that 90% of the employment in the developing world is created by the private sector. That is a lot, 90%. 91% of the $1 trillion in annual capital flows into developing countries is generated by the private sector. 50% of the services required to achieve the SDGs is with the private sector. So it's a no-brainer that the private sector is a critical player in achieving the SDGs. Now, for case in point, even educational services. I'm from Nigeria, and I've been across West Africa and many developing countries, and I realized that the public sector, not due to any fault of theirs, but it's failing the system. So more and more people are looking to private education. regardless of how low it is or whatever it is. Even with the healthcare systems, people are looking to private healthcare systems. So this shows that in the most critical things, the private sector plays an important role. So for us, we decided to set up the Private Sector Advisory Group, which is a coalition of different organizations across the world who have come together to serve and to give the UN and government advice on how to effectively engage the private sector towards achieving the 2030 agenda. I have a short video here which highlights the Private Sector Advisory Group. So essentially, the Private Sector Advisory Group was set up to ensure that the private sector can have a seat at the table in deciding how we achieve the 2030 agenda. How can we use the experience of the private sector, which is business-oriented and result-oriented, to achieve the results that we require by 2030. When the goals were set up, you had a 15-year timeline, but 2 years are gone already. There's 13 left, and before you know it, it'll be 2030. So we need to ensure that achieving the SDG is looked at like a business project where you can clearly map out the timelines and track to ensure that we're on course to achieve it. So I'll narrow down to Nigeria as an example, because one of the 13 companies that was selected by the UN to set up this PSAG was a Nigerian company called Sahara Group. And so the expectations were for the companies to then go to the countries where they operate and set up the local PSAG to ensure that the private sector in their various countries are engaged. And so this is exactly what Sahara aimed to do. In 2015, the PSAG was set up in New York. In 2017, the company in Nigeria took it up took it up to the presidency level and got the local PSAG in Nigeria to be inaugurated by the president of the country. And they were able to get 15 companies to come together from different sectors, so finance sector, from clothing, to everything you can think about, from fashion to food, to be able to come together and share their experiences and advise the government on how best to achieve the SDGs that have been clearly set out. And so it's, apart from serving and providing advice to the government, also to serve as a dialogue launchpad that can provide avenues for private sectors to be able to share their ideas, exchange ideas, and then implement projects together to be able to ensure that the SDGs are achieved. And so why the PSAG in Nigeria? What makes it different from the other organizations or structures that may exist? There are 4 different levels of accountability. And so there's the board leadership, which encompasses the 5 main organizations that set it up in Nigeria, has a representative of the United Nations in New York, and also the president of the country at the highest level. They make the highest level of decisions, what sort of projects will be implemented, how much money will be spent, and whatnot. Then there's the working committee, which is just the 5 companies who are the brain behind this. They're the ones who can then translate what has come from the board and put it into action, and then transfer it down to clusters of 15 larger organizations who serve as cluster leads for various. So you have these 15 organizations in different industries, and then they have different people in the same industry under them who then work with them to ensure that people with the same ideas can sit at the table and develop those ideas to achieve the SDGs. And so some of the things that we have seen that has come out of the PSAG is the fact that there's an open and transparent governance structure system where everyone is able to come together and pour out their minds and see how to work together to achieve the goals. There's an efficient impact measurement technique. One of the partners is PwC. I'm not trying to sell anybody's market here, but it's just to say that they were able to develop a mechanism to monitor and track the progress. Because something that we realize we don't have in the developing world is the fact that there's no baseline. The speaker that spoke just now said it. You don't even know what you have. You don't know the indices that are on ground. So how do you judge and measure progress? So with this, you're able to have a baseline, see what is obtainable, and then when you're making progress, you can track the progress and be able to report on what you're able to do. Then also credibility. We wanted to be able to create a platform where anyone, any institution, any government from across the world can look to the country and say there is a platform through which you can decide to channel funds to achieve the SDGs. And then also to be able to encourage people who have similar ideas to be able to come together and collaborate. Because you find out that there are a lot of people doing the same thing, but they're doing the same thing in silos. So you go to a country and you see 20 different organizations try to achieve water. You find out so many people trying to promote education, but then they're working in silos, and so they're not able to achieve much. But if you're able to come together, people with similar areas of interest can scale up their ideas and then generate more impact. And so for us, there's a shared imperative here. There's an advantage for the private sector working with the UN to achieve the SDGs, and there's an advantage also for the UN and the government to work with the private sector. Because from what we have seen, there's certain things that I can clearly articulate here for you. That since the adoption of the goals 2 years ago, all the governments across the world have seen the need to run with them and to engage the private sector towards achieving the goals. And this has led to a major shift in the way business is done across the world. Experts have said that to achieve the SDGs, the private sector is extremely critical. In fact, they have said the SDGs cannot be achieved without the private sector involvement. And so the private sector can clearly lay out the ways that the SDGs can be reached. With a simple example, you look at, there's so many private organizations that have branches or are operational in 30, 40, 50 countries of the world. This goes beyond the reach of any national government. Most governments just have, they have a say in the country that they run. But where you have a large company, for instance, who is operating in 40 countries, if they decide to integrate the SDGs into their operations, they can ensure that all this is done in all the countries where they operate. And thereby they are generating value and they're promoting the achievement of the SDGs in all the countries. And so the private sector plays a critical role in social and economic landscape. And so there's no way you can achieve the SDGs without the private sector. And so by aligning businesses with the SDGs, we realize that people are creating avenue for more business because there are so many social problems that people are trying to address. Critical problems, such as the economic problems, the social problems, the environmental problems, and these problems can be turned to business opportunities. We know the challenges that the world faces in different parts of the world are similar. Lack of resources, climate change, we spoke about climate change, water, the example of water in South Africa. I was in South Africa a couple of months ago, in Cape Town, and it's written everywhere that there's a serious water issue. And it's not just in South Africa, it's beginning to become a trend across the world. So if the world doesn't act now, it will be a catastrophe in the next couple of months. We're not talking about far future, we're talking about the near immediate future in this year. So it shows that there's a critical need and the activities that everyone is to carry out. So if we decide to look at these challenges and look at them as business opportunities, there's so much room for the private sector to make money while also positively affecting the environment, affecting people's life, and creating access to the resources that people think are so scarce. Going back to what the previous speaker just spoke about, and then the lady had also contributed about a simple machine that can help those things. That's a business opportunity for people to come into. People can invest in those things, and you're creating jobs for people, for the rural people, in a healthy way, in a sustainable way, and you're creating an income for them. So you're not only providing jobs for people, you're empowering people, you're employing them, and you're helping them to be able to gain access to more money, better health services, better education. So it just makes business sense. So the SDGs is not just about CSR where people think, oh, you just go and donate money, take pictures, and go away. It's about ensuring you can identify activities in line with your core business activities that can have positive impacts on the environment while also fetching you money. So it's a win-win situation. You're making money, and at the same time, you're having positive impacts on the environment. And that's the way that we want the private sector to start to look at the SDGs and the achievement of the SDGs. And as private sector individuals, there's certain questions that we need to ask ourselves so that we can ensure that we're in line with achieving the SDGs. Is that which of the SDGs do you think you have the opportunity to contribute to the most? When you look at your organization and your core strengths and competencies, I am sure there are at least one or two of the SDGs that you can achieve. In the private sector organizations, for instance, one question that we always ask people is, when you look at your company, a large company of 1,000 people, what's the ratio of male to female? That way you're addressing the issue of gender inequality. You find out that in most organizations, you have 90% male and 10% female. That's definitely not right. When you even if you say you have 50 to 50, when you look at the board of large organizations, how many people on the board are female? How are you that's how you're addressing gender inequality. When you're talking about things, even for the male, we realize a lot of private sector companies now that people have started to introduce what you call paternity leave, because your wife has a baby and she's struggling to take care of the baby herself because she herself is healing from just having a baby. But then if you have paternity leave where the husband can be at home to take care of his wife, you're helping your wife and you're making him more productive. So people look at it as, oh, there's nothing I can do to contribute to the SDGs. But if you decide to incorporate it into your business, look at your value chain. You can't say you're a cocoa company where you're providing, where you're making chocolates, and you don't look at your value chain to be able to see where your chocolate is coming from or your cocoa is coming from. You say, I'm producing it in Switzerland. Are you sure that you don't have children who are under the age of 18 working in a local farm in Africa producing the cocoa that you're purchasing? If you're doing that, then you're encouraging child slavery or child labor, which is wrong. So what we're asking private sector to do is look in your value chain, ensure you're doing things in line with the SDGs, promote the things that need to be promoted, and it's effective for your business. So to wrap it all up and not to take too much of your time, for the private sector, implementing the 2030 agenda and working with the SDGs is definitely good for the business. And also, for the public sector and for governments, they have realized that the private sector is critical in two major ways. Because of the influence and the importance of the private sector in the world, the private sector organizations have a large role to play in promoting things like human rights, addressing environmental issues, and also anti-corruption. In most parts of the world, you see what's going on in terms of anti-corruption and whatnot. And corruption, whether you like it or not, is bigger in the private sector than in the public sector, but it's covered up properly. But working with the government, you can ensure that corrupt practices are discouraged in the private sector and then ultimately in the public sector. And you find out that the world will be a better place to live in. And also, in terms of finances, the private sector has huge finances. And whether the public sector likes it or not, private sector organizations will continue to carry out CSR activities just because they want to, and to help them get their social licenses to operate. So working with the private sector, the public sector can take advantage of the untapped, huge financial resources that the private sector has towards ensuring that the world is a much better place for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. My name is Tim Patterson. I'm CEO of Fuel Economy Solution. Okay. We were recently requested to join the International Council for Petrocoal Gas in Delhi this week. And I wondered how would we be able to apply to join the Public Sector Advisory Group, and what benefits for private sector are there to be participating and obviously giving some time and effort with trying to deliver our businesses with limited resource as it is. How would we apply and how would we be able to participate?
Okay, so thank you for that, and well done. Congratulations on what you do. Two quick things. So obviously, to work with an organization like the UN, there's a criteria, and you have to also do a background check to ensure that any organization we're partnering with is doing things in accordance with the law. And so I can get your contact after this, and then we can have some email exchanges. The UN will have to do like a background check, and once that is done, and it's nothing too detailed, it's just to ensure there are no scandals, no child labor and things like that. And after that, all the organizations that are part of the Private Sector Advisory Group are able to tap into the resources, the knowledge, the expertise of the various companies that are already in the group and exchange ideas. And so whether or not it's a big company or a small company, no one is really asking for money or anything. It's how to come to the table and sit down and see what has worked in this country and what can work in this other country, how we can maximize the limited resources that you have. You may be able to find people to partner with here and there, but there's always, always something to gain from sitting down with like-minded people to talk about how to achieve the 2030 agenda.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I come from the very country where there's supposed to be no water.
Okay.
Close to Cape Town.
Okay.
I would like to congratulate you. I was very, very honored to attend the launch of the SDGs in Washington,
Okay. Good.
where I shared the exact model which you are now sharing with us.
Okay.
And I will be showing, when I do my presentation, what does such a model look like? How is it actually possible to make it work? So it has worked, and I'd like to say that everybody can do it, whether it's a small or a big company. It's about making the world work.
Yes, that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.